A quick bio, Slade Griffin, as you have heard already, is the Director of Security Assessments at Contextual Security Solutions, where he leads the cybersecurity assessment and penetration testing practice. He has over 15 years of experience in cybersecurity, specializing in vulnerability assessments, penetration testing, risk assessment, security program development, forensic analysis, and the list goes on. Slade is very passionate about security, blending his experience in the public, private, and military sectors to help others tackle their own cybersecurity challenges. Slade Griffin, I'm going to go ahead and pass this to you, and you should go ahead and have access to these slides.
Well, thanks so much for the introduction, Pete, and thanks everybody for giving us some of your time today. Do greatly appreciate that. I'm going to see if I have control here. Let's see. Does not look like I do. You gave me control, but I have to figure out how to take it here. I'll just cue you when it's time to do the slides, Pete.
It says you have controls now, Slade. You should be okay.
I've got it now. Thank you very much. I did want to take just a moment before I talk about our team and how we successfully gain access and then privileged access to environments. I did want to pause just a minute and again focus on the compliance team and say that one of the main differences I would say in my experience, and I've been a little about me, is I've been a penetration tester for 15 years. I've been working in IT for 20 years. Most of that is security related, all of the 20 years. And one thing I would say that is a differentiator for us, and one of the things I really love about the company is that everyone that works on both of our compliance and assessments team is deeply technical. We don't have anyone who has just been an auditor in the past. Brandon, that was talking earlier, has a background as an application developer, understands the nuts and bolts of security. Kevin Thomas, who is one of our principal consultants and one of the leader of our CTO, he has a background as a network engineer. And so those are some differentiators as well. So moving forward, you've seen a graph like this in the past that talks about your people, your processes, and your technology. We're not going to go into this a whole lot, but I want you to keep this in mind as we move forward. Which one is lacking? And that will bring us to our first poll question. Out of your people, processes, and technology, which one do you think is lacking in your organization? And what I want to try to show throughout the rest of the presentation is how these all relate to each other as we look at different attack vectors and how we want to take over an environment, what we want to do. We typically find an error in one of these, and we'll exploit the vulnerability in that error. I see we have a 50-50 between, now it's changing dynamically here. Let's give it just a second to see. And thanks for participating in these, by the way. This makes it much more fun for me. I would agree with what I see on the screen here. In our experience, we see that the number one resource that doesn't get poured into is people in an organization, whether that be a lack of human resources or a lack of training or the ability to follow on training later. It's typically people that are suffering, and then process would follow shortly behind that, where you may have a policy that shows what to do, but the process on how to do it or how many people know how to do it is lacking. A lot of people have pretty good technology these days, and very few people would ever say all of the above. So whoever is changing their answer there, that's fun. But we see pretty good technology nowadays, and that's because technology in this space has really improved over the years. And I know a lot of our partners that are on here, I know you are value-added resellers and you do sell products and along with services. And I think you would tend to agree that products have really come a long way, especially in the last 5 years. They've just gotten smarter, they analyze things better, but the people aspect is still just a little bit lacking. So moving on, how are these three things related? I had a poll question in here for this at one point, but it was really, I just took it out because I kind of know the answer. I know most people these days have a policy that says, hey, don't use USB drives, or don't pick up a or you tell your people, don't pick up a USB drive in the parking lot and plug it in. But what do you have in place that prevents that? Do you have a process or a technology that prevents them from using this? And I don't need an answer to that. This is just a rhetorical question. But the reality is 90% of the places I have been, they don't have anything technically that prevents this, and it is simple to plug in a device and use it. And the places that do have a technology to prevent it, it won't prevent things like HID-based attacks or human interaction device attacks, which we'll talk about later. But that essentially means if someone can plug in a USB keyboard and use it, then you are still vulnerable to these attacks. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And the idea here is that a policy without a technology and the training behind it is really just an exercise in writing that has been given. So someone had a good time writing a policy, but there's really nothing that enforces it. And one of the things that I developed an offline methodology for testing power systems years ago because they don't like scans, and typically the operators don't like untrained personnel touching their workstations. We developed a way to do offline auditing where we dump a bunch of information from, say, an engineer workstation in a control system environment. And one of the things we dump out of there is the USB history. And you'd be surprised how many times we find out that someone is plugging their iPhone in to charge it or their Android device to charge it. And malware can proliferate via those devices as well. So I'll move forward here to the next slide. So this is one of the most common attacks we use. And this is where what I want you to see in the picture here is, and I'm sure several of you have a setup similar to this, and some don't, but this is a place that has done a great deal of due diligence to make sure people can't just walk into their environment. And what you're looking at is you're looking at a receptionist at an electric co-op, and that is one of my team members on the other side of the glass talking to her. And this gentleman has come in. We've been hired at this facility to perform a red team assessment. So for purposes of this presentation, we will define red team as a penetration test with a physical element. So that is, can we overcome your physical controls or bypass your personnel and gain physical access to a facility, and will that therefore grant us logical access to your networks and systems? So we've got a gentleman here, and if you could see in his hand a little better, you'd see that he's holding one of those metal clipboards like any serviceman or tradesman would do coming in, and he's also got a very long tape measure in his hand, and he is claiming to be there to measure for new carpet, which I thought was pretty bold of him, because who knows, maybe they just got the carpet replaced last week, but that's what he rolled the dice, and 2 minutes later, here he is behind the counter. And the question here becomes, it's do we scold the human that allowed this, or does our training need to be better, or both? And my answer would probably be both. The ability to stop someone from physically coming in is very difficult. People want to be nice. They're trying to get things done in an expeditious manner. But at the same time, verifying who is supposed to be in your facility and having a process for that people follow and that you check regularly is very much needed in today's world. He was in there for quite a while. I think he lasted about 5 or 6 minutes, and then I'll back up one here. We actually removed one of the pictures. I think in about the 5 or 10 minute mark, the lady that you see behind him there actually figured out something was up, because clearly my employee does not know how to measure for carpet and install it. So she got suspicious of his behavior, and he was asked to leave at that point. So he had been caught and asked to leave, and in this particular instance, the rules of engagement required us to leave when we were asked. Sometimes people tell us don't leave when you're asked to leave, and see what our people will do. I don't like to do that, because it makes you nervous and it makes us nervous, and when people get nervous, sometimes they do silly things today. In today's society, and sometimes people do silly things even when they're not nervous. But so what he did was he complied, walked straight out, walked around the building, and found this door where everybody likes to smoke or go in and out at a service entrance. And this is a great example of having the correct signage and policy and procedure in place. And as you look down, this door was not closed. So we find this, I would say 60% to 75% of the time when we do this, and we don't do a lot of physical red teaming. It's not something a lot of people want to do, but when we do it, the first attack vector you saw, where we just try to work past the human, does typically work. And then this is even more successful, where we do find an entrance that that has been left open, where we can tailgate or just walk in behind somebody with like a contractor badge or something like that. Now, upon entering this facility, I don't know how many of you saw Night at the Museum Battle of the Smithsonian, where Ben Stiller's character went in and stole a uniform for a security guard. But at this point, I received a text from my team member saying, you know, hey, can I put on one of their uniforms? And because this is the electrical industry, that answer was no. Didn't want to put him in any kind of position where he could endanger his safety or the safety of others by being asked to do something he wasn't qualified to do. But I could certainly understand his temptation at that moment to grab a uniform, put it on, and be able to maybe take a truck out into the field and get the modern electrical trucks have all kinds of systems in them that are interconnected to both the corporate office and control systems. They have the ability to do meter reading and things like that. Probably, and most of the time the keys are actually in the trucks in the yard once they're open for business for the day. So it would have been probably pretty trivial to get a hold of those, but the answer here was no. These are the kind of things we walk around and look for. And the question to ask yourself here is, if I found this port, let's say I got into your environment, and I know several of you, you know, that just would not be possible. But if I got into your environment and I was in there, and this port was open, and I plugged in one of our remote access devices to it, would it get an IP address? Would this be allowed on your network? If it wouldn't, why wouldn't it? And if it would you get an alert that a new device or an unauthorized device had been attached to your network? Get a couple of these. We've done these for religious organizations, big oil companies, pretty much almost 100% of the time. DHCP is enabled everywhere, and network access control is not enabled anywhere. So it's very common to be able to gain access through this vector in this manner. And then lastly, for this particular type of attack, we end up in this is the CEO's office, and this is where we wanted to be. He was gone. We knew he was on vacation, and it was this is where he spent the day attached to this network port in this office, which we want to make sure works all the time, of course, because you want to keep the boss happy. And it was a great place to work, very comfortable, and he enjoyed his stay there, and left only when he was required to. Let's see, can I lost the controls there for a moment, Pete. There we go, I got them back. Okay. So next poll question to make sure everybody's still awake. What makes a or your wireless network secure? So I'll wait just a minute while people answer that. There are quite a few opinions on this, on what makes the wireless secure or not secure. If you need the URL again, it's at the top of the screen here. I'd love to get some people chiming in on this. What makes it secure? Other, I see other in there. If you have an other, if you want to go ahead and populate something over in the chat window, I'd love to see what some of these answers are for other. 100% other. Nobody else is going to vote for the encryption mechanisms. This is a pretty good crowd. I'm enjoying this so far. I'll wait just a little more. Oh, network segmentation, I do like that. So the correct answer is other. All of these encryption mechanisms can be overcome in one way or another. WEP, I think most people are familiar now with how WEP is broken. I see another, John, I see that separate network, no firewall, no access. Now, I love that answer, but, oh, Kevin, very good answer. Password policy and who it's given to. So network segmentation is good, but I know that so many of you that have to support a network, and some of us that are just vendors, I understand we don't, but the people that have to support networks, they have somebody in their office who says the corporate network must have wireless access for at least one special user. I know that happens a lot out there, and so that kind of throws the segmentation out of the mix in about 90% of the environments we go to. I can only think of one customer that we have right now that actually does not have wireless access to their corporate network for anybody. But everybody else makes some provision for that. So I like the password policy, Kevin, that's good. Network segmentation is also excellent. You should certainly, if you have a guest network, that should not be allowed on your internal network. And also, your corporate laptops and phones and devices should not be allowed access to your guest network. So not only don't let the guest network in, but don't let corporate assets attached to that guest network, because that is a hostile environment. This is one way to extend the perimeter that used to exist, which has been vaporizing slowly over the years. So some of the ways that we overcome the wireless things that are in place, I'll show you some different attacks here. On the right, let me see if I can grab this here and see if this works. What you'll see is on the right-hand picture is I was given a visitor access to this office, which was on the 33rd floor of Park Avenue in New York City at a very big client of ours, and they still use web access to their network, and it does have access to the corporate network. This is me in there at 3 a.m. trying to break the web password because they gave me guest access and said to make myself at home, so I did. I came in late at night and started doing this. Obviously, I was able to get into this network. The other two pictures are people that are using WPA2 Enterprise or 802.1x. And there's a very specific type of attack that works for this, where you set up your own free radius server and you set up, you beacon their SSID. So if your SSID is a secure wireless, then I set up the same thing and I broadcast that. The top picture is in St. Louis, Missouri, where I'm about 1,000 yards away from their wireless network, so that as they drive home at night, their phones and their devices would disassociate with their legitimate network and associate with mine, and then my free radius server would challenge their access, and then their device would send their 802.1x certificate or their WPA2 enterprise certificate, which contains the username and the password for that network. The bottom picture is in Des Moines, Iowa, where I was unsuccessful in the parking lot of the facility. So I drove around for a while, and it was at the mall I was able to get a certificate for that. The password is encrypted and it's hashed in the certificate when I get it. And for WPA2, the pre-shared key mode, that's where everybody has just a passphrase. And this comes back to what you said, Kevin, in the chat. I can always capture the handshake or get the certificate in these manners, but if the password is of sufficient length, then I won't be able to crack it. So I would need a password that was greater than 15 characters with some layer of complexity or random words in it in order to not be able to get on the network. So, so two things that will save your wireless network are network segmentation and a robust password policy that you check to make sure it doesn't work. Going back to wireless attacks, different ways we look at that. Sometimes we cannot break into your network via those means. So when we can't, what we do is we attack the human. So what you're looking at here, lower middle right, is the Wi-Fi Pineapple from Hack5. This has several features in it that are amazing. One is the ability to see which SSIDs your devices beacon, and then to replicate that and try to steal certificates and things like that, or just to set up a hotspot. You could set up kind of a phishing landing page. Every device on here, this is a Pi 0 on the far right. And then these new devices from Hacker Arsenal are absolutely fantastic. They don't make the one with the green battery in it in the middle any longer. I do still have one of those, and I use this as a demo all the time. And this is where you can just stand up a page that says, you can throw up an SSID out there that says high-speed wireless internet or free internet, whatever you want it to say, and it has a login page. And of course, you can put a banner there that says, hey, thanks for attending our conference. This has been sponsored by whoever, Contextual Security. You can log in with your corporate credentials. And I'm sure all of you can imagine you got a few of those folks in your organization that would log into that. If you don't have a person in your organization that would log into that, just consider carefully that it might be you, and don't be that person. But this is where we'll go after the human. And again, you see how we're interrelating the people, the process, and the technology here. So we'll work around whatever problem we have to in order to gain access. Both of these two devices on top are called the YNX modules from Hacker Arsenal, if you want to look at them. I believe the one on the left with the battery was about $40. The one on the right that is USB powered which we run on a small battery, was about $30 at the time. They are a little cumbersome to set up. If they can only populate a single HTML page, and you have to base 64 encode images and things like that. So they are a little bit difficult to use. Okay, going back to physical access, I want to show you some of the things that we'll leave behind when we have physical access. So we've covered wireless and physical to this point. All of these devices are things for physical attacks. I like to start in the bottom right-hand corner. That key is in my CTO's hand. I believe he paid $8 or $9 for that on eBay, and at the time, I don't remember the exact percentage, but it would open the majority of fuel pumps in the United States. So easily acquired physical attack there, and while you may not be a fuel retailer, I'm sure you can relate that to how this would affect your environment. The device right above that, this little box, is similar to one of our Intel NUC devices, which we'll sometimes leave behind. These beacon outbound on ports 80 and 443 gives us remote control of them. If you have 80 and 443 proxied, there are ways to do that via SSH. Again, this speaks to the need for egress filtering, both as a policy so that people know their traffic is filtered outbound, and then a technology that can actually stop it from going outbound. We see a USB keyboard attack here, and upper right is the rubber ducky from Hack5. These are devices that can emulate keyboards. The one in the middle is a keystroke logger that you can plug into a machine and leave. The one in the upper right, like I said, is emulates a keyboard, and so you put special code on that you can write up in their ducky scripting language. And then you can begin sending commands to the device. And essentially, if a user can plug in a keyboard and a mouse on their workstation and it will work, then this attack in the upper right will work. So what you would want to prevent there is the outbound transmission of data. The script I have currently on mine does SMTP outbound through Gmail and sends me the information. It dumps all of the running information on the computer and sends that to me. Upper left, what is there is a device that does actually function as a USB to Cat5 adapter, but it has the same characteristics as the rubber ducky, and it will, this one runs things like LLMNR and WPAT attacks, which I'll talk about a little bit later. It automates some of those. It can do keystroke logging. It can do the HID attack that the rubber ducky does. It is programmable. You can run any of the attacks you want. And on the bottom left, those are credit card skimmers. One of them is a surface mount skimmer, so sometimes those are detectable. You can look at those and see that it's there. You could wiggle it and see that it's there. The other one is one that inserts into the slot, and that is much more difficult for the user to detect, and that is one of the reasons that it's required for people to go and look for these that work in these environments, looking for credit card skimmers. But these technologies, of course, just like I said earlier, like our security technologies are improving over the years. Obviously, the ability to misuse those technologies improves as well. So I'm going to move on. I think I've got a demo to show you here. Let's see. And hopefully everybody knows the rule about live demos. Just never do it. What I'm going to show you here is one of our common attacks. This is an internal attack that we do. This is an old tool called Cain Enable. And this is an ARP poisoning attack, and this simply takes advantage of the way disparate networks communicate to each other. And one of the ways they do that is by knowing what they can communicate to. So in an ARP poisoning attack, to simplify this, essentially our attack platform, which you're looking at here, which happens to be Windows, becomes the gateway for the network. And this allows us to do a couple of things. It allows us to receive all traffic that goes through the network, so it all passes through us before it goes to your network gateway. And the second thing that this particular software does is it will do X509 based attacks. So if you're trying to communicate outbound to say yourcompany.office365.com, it will generate a fake certificate that says yourcompany.office365.com. It will present it to your user. Your user will be presented with a dialog box that says there's something wrong with this certificate. Click OK or cancel. And what you see on the screen right now is what happens when they click OK. That decrypts the stream, and you get what's fuzzed out right here, a username and password in clear text at that point. We have taken out the private information from this so that the customer couldn't be identified. But this decrypts the stream. Everything's decrypted at that point. We can get RDP sessions, Telnet, other protocols. It's a great attack. I would say this works almost 90% of the time on an internal penetration test when we run an ARP poisoning attack. It's remained a very wonderful tool over the years. Now, Kane Enable does not work on Windows 10 currently. The Linux-based equivalents of this would be EtterCap and BetterCap, which has recently come out and are now part of the Kali Linux penetration testing platform that we use. They're not quite as clicky and user-friendly, but they do work very well, and you can glean a lot of information out of that. You can also get a lot of information out of just the packet captures if you're willing to sort through them. One of the other attacks that we use that is very successful, obviously, is phishing. The two vectors that we like to use for this are a 401k matching increase program, where what we do is if your domain is mycompany.com or company.com, what we will do is we'll buy mycompany.com or company.org, whatever is available that's similar. And we'll set up our phishing from that domain, and we ask your employees simply if they would like to increase their 401k matching to 8.5%. We recently had, we sent this one out recently to a customer, and about 80% of the people responded. It was the highest one we'd ever had, and it just so happened that this email coincided with a lot of people being upset about 401k at the company not being where they thought it should be. So it was actually just a little bit luck of the roll of the dice there for us, and we were able to capitalize on something we didn't know was a problem there. But we got a huge amount of success on that. The other one we like to use is we like to tell your people that it's time for them to do their cybersecurity training, and that they need to log in and complete that. And I know that's a little bit unfair because we might be preying on you as the actual person there, but this one works pretty well also. So these are what the templates look like. This is what it looks like when you receive it. Typically, there's no errors. There's nothing in there that would make somebody think it's spam or anything like that. Now, some spam filters are starting to catch this a little better. But the thing I've noticed is that the better that the spam filter gets, and I'm sure some of you have experienced this, the more the spam filter also starts to reject legitimate traffic, because, I mean, let's face it, what makes email legitimate? It's very difficult to trace back and discover what makes email legitimate without whitelisting domains. And of course, that's just not a possibility for most organizations. Email was built to send two-way communication, and it does that very well. And so that is just one of those vectors that is easy to exploit. But I did notice recently that, in fact, the customer that we had such great success with has recently implemented a new technology, and it actually blocked a legitimate email from me before, and they did have to whitelist my domain in order for me to send traffic as we continue our relationship with them. So it does come with some convenience trade-offs, and I think most people are aware of that. Let's see. So I've got a question in the chat here that says, forensic question, is there a way to trace the origin of the phishing emails that the victims of the scams received? Yes and no. You can trace back to a certain point. So obviously, if they proxied through more than one, you would only get the previous one. Sometimes you can get the full chain of this. But yes, emails do still send headers that you can pull out. Most software is actually making it harder to pull out the email headers now, but it still can be done, and you can trace this back. I am a certified forensic analyst as well, and email certainly is one of the vectors that we look at a lot. And in fact, I just wrapped up a case where email was the attack vector for malware, and we were able to figure out where that came from. So yes, you can do that the majority of the time. Sometimes, though, they've obfuscated it through multiple links or just an open SMTP relay, and then you're just back at, so you would have to get the logs off of that server to see who connected to it for the SMTP relay. Thanks for the question. I really appreciate that. It's fun to interact with folks as we go through this. And this is what the login page looks like. So we put your logo up there. We try to match your color scheme and fonts as best we can. And we put the graphs in here to show some trending. Clicks So the amount of people in an organization that will actually click a link or follow a link or come to our page is really decreasing. And most organizations are still striving for the 0 clicks. And the question is, like, do we stop it or detect it? And the answer is you should do both. You should try to stop it, but you should definitely detect it. And so knowing when people go to a domain and whether or not, the detection mechanism would be looking for malware. Of course, you can't just say, well, they alert on every time a user goes to a web page. No one would ever be able to filter through those. But if their browser was getting hooked or malware was being delivered that way, that's what you would want to detect in that stream. But what you can see is that the total logins from the people that do click, even though the sample of who clicks on it is small, the sample of people who will log in once they go to the page is still very large. So we find that if people are willing to visit the page, they're typically willing to give us a credential. And at that point, now we're using the open source intelligence vectors that we've gathered, like VPN logins or Office Web Access or Office 365 portals or Gmail portals. We're looking for external logins now, VPNs, firewall logins, anything external with a login. We're going to try these credentials on that. And that stresses the need for something we'll talk about later, which is multi-factor authentication, having 2 forms of authentication. Now this brings me to my next polling question. How do you perform security awareness education in your environment? Do you do internal phishing? And by internal, I mean, do you or your team do it? Do you do external phishing? Do you have a third party do it externally or some combination of that? Do you do internal training where you just tell people don't click on links or we will punish you? Do you do external training where you have somebody like me come in and we'll set up an example and we'll demonstrate the impact of this, or you just don't do it? So I'll give everybody a minute to respond here. My experience in this is that most folks are starting to adopt external phishing, or they buy a service. So they buy PhishMe or KnowBe4 or contract someone like us to do this, and they're doing it that way. But I'd say it's about 50-50 now, where people are actually phishing their employees or they're just doing training. So it looks like you all reflect that pretty well here. And then obviously there's people that don't do any. And I would just stress that, do that every now and then. Do it to demonstrate impact, not to shame people, but as a teaching moment to show them, hey, this is how this stuff works. This is how technologies overcome antivirus. We can demonstrate that, how browsers get hooked, how you can obfuscate the payload in something, and do that. The next slide here. So thanks again for participating in the poll. I do appreciate that. Looking at examples here of people, data breaches that happen this way, employees posting passwords online, and this speaks to, do you have a social media policy or a public posting policy in your organization? Most people don't still. It's not common. You see a couple of things here on bottom right. You see 2 examples from Intamans and US Airways where somebody said something, got taken the wrong way, and of course the internet started to burn down with angst or disappointment at what they said, and they had to issue a public apology. It's very hard to repair a company reputation, if you can ever do it. Yeah, you see on the left a Krebs article where Brian Krebs on security article where people are posting passwords online sometimes. The top right is probably the most interesting. Kurt Eichenwald is a journalist who suffers from epilepsy. He wrote something online that someone disagreed with, which I know surprises everyone on the call, that anything a journalist wrote was disagreed with. But someone knew he suffered from epilepsy and sent him an animated picture that flashed at 3 cycles per second or so and said, have a seizure. And it did give him a seizure, and that person was arrested for assault with a deadly weapon for sending a picture on Twitter that cycled. I don't know if they were prosecuted and been sentenced on that yet, but the importance of a social media policy in kind of with the proliferation of information and how quickly people react to stuff like that these days is very important. I'm going to skip ahead to our next poll question here and ask, what is the minimum length that you allow for your passwords? 6, 8, 10, 12, or other? 8 is the most common. I see that one right out there. I see other. If you have an other, would you please throw it in the chat over there so we can see some examples of password excellence, I'm sure. So let's see. I've got the majority we see are still 8. And the next slide I'm going to show you will demonstrate. Oh, this one seems to be popular, so we're going to leave that running for just a minute. Actually, this probably, Pete, this won't work on your computer, but this is 2 videos that would show how trivial it is to break passwords that are 8 characters or less. Essentially, with today's computing power and using graphics processing units and video cards and the proliferation of word lists, any time a big data breach happens, every hacker on the planet downloads the broken passwords that have been cracked and throws them in a word list, and we all use those to perform dictionary attacks. The 2 videos that are usually here show a dictionary-based attack and a brute force attack, and it shows just how quickly we're able to compromise both, get compromised passwords with both of those. We did run some statistics on this to show what this normally looks like, and according to the diagram, most people were doing 8 or above, and what we find is that a lot of people still have less than 8 characters in a lot of passwords, and we normally find those in privileged accounts, and that is because in some domains, Active Directory domains, it is possible for privileged accounts to have exceptions to the password policy. So think about the impact there of you've brought in a vendor that is, say, a firewall vendor or a patching service, so they must have a privileged account, and they've left it at the default password, which is less than 8 characters. People in general think that can't happen. It happens all the time. Or they'll change their password policy to have more than 8 characters, yet they will not do a force change for the entire domain. So that's the chart on the left that displays that, and then of course the chart on the right shows what kind of complexity we typically find. And you can see that most people use mixed alpha and numbers. It should be noted that your password policy probably gives 4 levels of complexity. So it gives 8 characters, upper and lower case, and a special character and a number. So, and that Windows can actually only enforce 3 of those. There's a limitation that only lets it enforce 3 of those 4. So it's likely that if you have the 8 character upper and lower case and a number or special character, keep in mind that password with a capital P and an exclamation point would satisfy that policy. And what we recommend is make sure that you have long passwords. Long passwords are better than short complex passwords. Long complex passwords are better than long simple passwords. So one of the tricks we show is use 3 random words for that, such as a vacation destination, your favorite color, and an exotic animal at the zoo. Something that wouldn't be found in a dictionary and is not common, is not a real word in any language, or is not a phrase in any language. That will greatly help with password security. And I see we're running out of time here, so I'm going to skip ahead here. I've got another poll question for you, I believe, coming up here. Oh, I like this. So, do you get alerts when accounts are created or services are disabled? And the answer in most places is no. So I love that I see 100% of you do get alerts when that happens. I'm a little skeptical of the results, but I will believe you. So now I see some people coming in and saying no, they don't. And let me demonstrate to you the importance of that. So one of the things that we like to do is, this is our attack. This is how we run through an attack on an internal test. We start looking for what's called the LLMNR and WPAB protocol attacks. We're running a Python script here, and we're poisoning. People are looking for a certain DNS entry, and we're responding to that saying, yes, we have it. And then we send a challenge up here. There's a challenge string that we send and say, yeah, I have that, but I'm going to need you to send your single sign-on credential. And what's been responded with is here is the username, the domain, and then the rest of this is the user's password hash. This is mitigated very easily. And we find that people are starting to do this now. To eliminate the WPAD error, you want to uncheck this box in your local area network settings in Windows. This is on by default in Windows, by the way. So turn this auto detect on and create a DNS entry for the entry of WPAD.dat and respond to that and route it to nothing. Don't give it an IP address, route it to nothing, and this attack won't work. For the LLM and R protocols, it's a little more involved. You can turn off multicast name resolution, as you see here in group policy, and you can also disable the local setting in your advanced NetBIOS settings. Additionally, to go back to the people earlier that mentioned network segmentation, prevent inter-VLAN communications. That is also always very helpful. So moving through that's how we gain access. That typically takes about 5 minutes, and we have a username and a password. And then from there, we see how privileged is that. So you can see the user Han Solo here. Some of the guys on my team are big Star Wars fans. So if Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Darth Vader, any of those people ever suddenly have an account on your domain, you give us a call, ask if we've been there. That is what happens. And you can see two things here. He's created a domain administrator account, and he's simply stopping the antivirus service that was preventing a privilege escalation attack here. And he's created Han Solo here. He is a domain administrator. You can see that in the primary group down here. We're starting to see about 30% of the people we work with get alerts when a privileged account is created. But for the remainder of the 70%, they don't know. And what we find is we put this in the report that we generate with the recommendation to please remove the account, and quite often the account is still there when we come back the next year and we still have access, or they've left the account and they've just disabled it, and so we use a different account to re-enable the attack. And getting into the be prepared, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up and open up for questions here in just a minute, even though I have several more slides. We want you to think about your security program and the development of this as a continuous cycle with all of these elements to it. But more than that, to look at things, the way we like to look at your security program is to have these layers of security best practice and authoritative standards. But in the middle of that, your policies should inform your employees on how to consistently deploy these things, like technologies, how your environments work together, and have these working with security best practices and in compliance. And that's where Brandon's team and my team, we try to work hand in hand to make sure, Brandon said to make sure that we achieve compliance review, but really our goal is to exceed the compliance standard. We want to make you compliant, give you a report on compliance, say you passed, but we want you to be ready for the next iteration of that standard that comes out. So my team focuses on not reading the policy or the standard. We leave that to Brandon's team, and we try to greatly exceed that by what else can we use to overcome those protections that are there from the regulatory standard with the best practice. And so working those two things together in harmony to make all of these things work. And without formal documented policies and procedures, all these inconsistencies will come up. And obviously the last thing I would say with respect to this slide is to have continuous monitoring and testing these things. Some real quick observations before I open this up for questions. A lot of people think that their network looks like this. They think it's nice and segmented, but when they say the term VLAN, they really mean subnet, and they do not have control mechanisms like the IDS and the firewall and the access control list that prevent anybody from going anywhere. And so to us, as we plug into your network, I would say 99% of the time it looks like this to us. We see it as a flat network where we can touch everything, and we move about freely once we have access to the network. Other quick wins, obviously we talked about have multi-factor authentication. You're going to have to switch to the push notification soon on the mobile device. NIST is saying that the SMS is no longer secure. And then having system hardening guides and do security awareness training internally. PCI requires multi-factor authentication for remote access, and as well as getting into the cardholder data environment. So you can see that getting pushed out. I'm going to go ahead and pause here, Pete, and let people ask questions, and I'll be available for as long as people need to keep going here.
Fantastic work, Slay. Really appreciate it. I do got a couple quick questions for you. Before we get into that, though, just want to spend 10 seconds doing a quick recap here. As if you guys haven't already recognized, what we do for organizations is security services and compliance engagements, including pen testing, web apps, forensic testing, you name it. Brandon ready to talk about PCI, HIPAA, NIST, and other compliance engagements. The key here is if you've got any requirements or just want to learn more about who we are and what we do, please contact the partner that reached out to you to invite you to this webinar. You can also email us at partners@contextualsecurity.com, and we'll put you in touch with the right representative. And again, lastly, the $50 Amazon gift card will be awarded by the end of this week on Friday. So as Slade mentioned, we are going to do a Q&A. I've got a couple questions sent to me privately. Please do send these through chat if you like to, and we're going to open up the lines as well in a second. One of the questions, Slade, it relates to the, I'm not going to say it right, Zankinlo root-based malware, which is obviously affecting Windows 10 dramatically, bombards PC with ads, includes spying on users from what I've read about it. Do you have a take on that particular malware?
I have not seen that malware or heard of it. We don't do a lot of malware investigation. We did just finish one, and all I can tell organizations to do on that is to have a lab set up where you can analyze the stuff yourself. And one of the ways to do that is to have a virtual machine on what I would suggest having it on a Linux host, have a Windows guest on it, and learn how to do a network packet capture off of that. So that you can see exactly what it does to a system and what data does it ship out. Because if you have PHI, protected health information, for example, on a machine, or cardholder data on a machine, you would want to know without a doubt, did it transmit data outbound, or did it just lock it up and hold it for ransom? So I'm not familiar with that malware, but that is my malware ransomware advice.
Thank you for that, Slade. Another question comes to us regarding more around Tesla. As we probably have heard in the news, there was an ex-employee that sabotaged their internal manufacturing operating system, stealing company data. What is your take on what contextual security could do to either help prevent these kind of breaches, or after the fact, what can contextual security do to educate and help any organizations concerned about this kind of breach?
Wow, that's a really loaded question, but I'll start with just a few high points there. So I think before the breach, I think what you want to do in your organization is make sure that only people that need data have access to the data. And I hate to use the military as a reference because we don't want every environment to be militaristic, but need to know is critical. So network segmentation, data classification, making sure only certain people have access to it. Now that begets the question though of what do you do with people that have access? And you just have to say that there's some implicit trust that comes with certain job titles. So some people are going to have access to that. And if they go rogue on you, you want to make sure you have a couple of things in place. Number one, the ability to detect what to do. Do you have a termination procedure for people? So let's say you're going to fire them. You know, if you're going to walk in and fire Peter, who's on, I'm going to use Peter because I like Peter. If you're going to walk in and we're going to fire Pete, does Pete know he's getting fired, number one? And once he knows, does he still have access to computer systems, or did you disable that first? So, you know, of course, our recommendation would be disable his access before telling him. And then also have the ability to create a forensic image immediately, whether it's for malware or for a termination or for an investigation like this. 100% of the time, no one in an organization that we deal with knows how to create a forensic image. So I'm going in and creating what's called a dead image. And that means I cannot capture what's in the running memory because they've shut the device down. And that's a crucial thing these days, to be able to use a tool called volatility, grab the running memory. You can find things like keystrokes and passwords and things that they think they've deleted a lot easier in running memory than you can from a dead disk image. So I know I just kind of hit some high points really quick on that, but those are kind of the main things you could do around those issues.
Hi, this is Roy Davis. I have a quick question regarding the Y-Monitor Hacker Arsenal tool you guys use.
Yes, sir. What can I answer about that for you?
Yeah, can you just kind of tell me a couple of things? What does it do for you? How does it work? And I was doing a search on the internet to try and buy one, but it says they're sold out, and I don't know how to get one.
Yeah, they don't sell the portable one anymore. I think they still sell the regular one. But so what it does is it just it sets up a fake site. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
I got muted there. Okay, good. It broadcasts a fake. It broadcasts an SSID, and you have to code a login page for people to log into. I don't have mine with me, or I would just set one up real quick and show you what it looks like. But it's essentially just a login page, and you try to get people to. It's a passive phishing attack, so to speak. You're just setting up somewhere for people to try and authenticate to.
Okay. And is there a tool in Kali that does that?
Oh, there's multiple wireless tools in Kali that will do that. The benefit of the YNX module is it's highly portable. So you don't have to carry around a laptop or something as big as the Wi-Fi
Gotcha.
Pineapple. You've got something that'll fit in your pocket.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, it's an outstanding tool. And if you would like to see just a private demonstration of that, Pete would be more, we can set that up where I can just do a quick demo of just that tool.
So do you know if they're going to start making and selling those again, or is that just kind of a one-time buy it at DEF CON kind of thing and that's it?
Yeah, I don't know, because they were selling like hotcakes earlier this year, and then I actually fried my portable module by putting the battery in backwards and had to buy another one, and I think I got one of the last ones. So I hope they'll start making them again, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, great talk, by the way. Thanks.
Thank you, Roy. Thanks for your attendance. I'm going to go ahead and unmute the lines again. Any other questions for our presenter? All right, guys, thank you again for attending. We do appreciate the hour and 5 minutes you put into our contributing to today's presentation. Keep an eye out for an email from us very shortly as a follow-up. We will be doing these all the time with some updated. I'll pass it to you for any final points.
Yeah, just again, wanted to say thanks to everybody, and like Jim asked, if there's a demonstration you want to see of a particular tool or technology, just contact Pete, and I'll be happy to set that up for you and show you exactly how these attacks look and what they do.
Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful day.